Hello, welcome back to another episode of D54. I'm Amit. We're back for a special 3 show. Been too long since we've got Sunny and Doug all together in the one room. How you guys going?
Oh man,
I'm going good, man.
It's so good to see you, Sonny. It's so good to see you.
Great to see you, Doug. Cannot wait for another one of these. It's been too long.
Let's do this. Let's get
Been way too long, guys. And that's probably the last you'll see us smiling on the show because
It is.
Yep. Like, yeah, man, we are covering one of the most brutal movies. One that really hits you in the heart, hits you in the chest, gets you right, pulls your emotional strings, all the sort of terms you want to say, man. Thanmathra, the Mohanlal masterclass. It was, heavily requested. The origins of this movie basically for us came when Sunny and we reviewed Kiridam, and we asked what movie should be, which Mohanlal movie should we be looking at next. And I think we got almost everyone in the comment section said this movie. So this is extremely popular, and I think we know why.
Yeah, it's very easy to understand why.
Yeah. Definitely true. So guys, based on we've been doing this thing where we're sort of mixing reactions and talking. We're going to try and do that a bit more in this one now. It's not a full watch along. Like, we're not going to be watching scenes all the time. We are going to have, lots of conversations about this. It is more of a deep dive. And we're going to sort of try and unpack this message, unpack this movie and the messages it's sort of telling us. Obviously, there's some personal experiences that we've all had. I think Doug especially has had some really close ones. So we're going to talk about it from our own personal lens a little bit. But we are going to use some scenes to be visual aids throughout this process and sort of help you guys, see how we sort of reacted to some of these scenes. Because, man, there were some brutal ones. But before we get into that, let me start with you, Sunny, man. Like, what were your general impressions about this movie? Like, just high level, what did you think about it?
Look, this is a film that was always going to be brutal. As soon as I read the synopsis, I was like, oh man, this is, and knowing Malayalam cinema, they're not the most sentimental bunch out there, and they were going to go in for a penny, in for a pound on this. And so I was steeling myself, and still the emotional roller coaster of this was just like, it's hard to avoid. Like, you can't be steely throughout watching these performances. And Mohanlal, must be my third movie watching him, and what an impressive performance. This might be the best we've seen yet, and easy to understand why people love this performance from him. And this is just a story that probably isn't told very often, or at least I haven't heard it being told very often. Maybe it has in Hollywood and I just haven't seen it, but it is what I assume, a fairly realistic look at kind of someone going through early onset Alzheimer's, and it's an amazing and empathetic insight into how it affects the person and the people around them. So I was moved and gripped the entire time.
Yeah, man, definitely. It was one that really, at times, like, it's the kind of thing that's really scary, because it's kind of like, while I'm watching this, I'm like,
yeah,
there might be a point in my life and a lot of other people's lives where you watch this and you forget that you actually watched this. And that is just a haunting feeling, which is so real. And it's not, it's not like it's rare. This is a very common actual illness that people have. So I really applaud them for sort of going and sort of talking about this kind of movie. Movies like that explore mental health are always going to be challenging. The one that's most popular to me is like probably Forrest Gump, but it doesn't take this same approach. Like, it's a different kind of illness altogether. But yeah, Doug, what about you, man? How was your experience watching this for you? Because obviously, you've got some experience with Alzheimer's with your father and all that stuff too. So how was it, man?
Yeah. Well, so before we recorded, I was telling both of you guys how I had to kind of watch this more clinically, because not only do I have experience, I have almost this exact direct experience. You could substitute me in for the son, and that's pretty much what happened. In that my father all of a sudden started developing the symptoms, and I literally, what connected Amit and I in the first place, and now you, Sonny, was a podcast that I made all about my experience trying to mourn my father, trying to unpack his own experience with dementia. And he passed away 2 days after my daughter was born. And how do you reconcile with all those things? And how do you forgive yourself for not being there enough? And could you have done more? And could you have maybe worked something out of him? And it's really, really difficult to describe watching this. And, immediately after watching it, you were like, oh no, was it triggering? And not necessarily, only in the way that it was meant to be triggering, meant to be emotionally effective, and meant to be an empathy machine for anybody who might be going through something like this. Because there's a scene about midway through where the doctor's explaining that the family are the people who need to be prepared. you can't really do much for the patient. And that scene was the one where I was like, all right, they get it. Because Mohanlal's performance must have been informed, I can't imagine, given someone of his caliber, that he didn't study a case or didn't study videos or didn't look at someone in particular or listen to someone in particular who had gone through it. But I enjoyed that this movie looked at it specifically through that lens. Like, how is this family being affected? Specifically the son and the wife. Just like gut-wrenching. Those scenes in between the old love interest when he's, grabbing the cheeks and, saying the pet name and using all that stuff was so effective to immediately, like, that's when I started to shake off, like, okay, this is different than what my dad went through. There are scenes that are absolutely indicative, especially as he's driving, trying to figure out where he's going and why he was going there in the first place, or the vegetables brought to the office and taking off the shirt.
Oh boy.
Like, all of that stuff happened to me, a version of it. And I won't get into it. If you want to know, we can ask us and I'll send you a link to the other show. But if you look at it in Hollywood, dementia had been expressed roughly at about the same time very popularly in The Notebook, which of course was a book first and then turned into a movie. But every single one of these movies can't help but give you that scene like they're back for this 1 second.
Yeah.
And in that movie, it's used to like, oh, I want to make you feel romance. But in this movie, it was used to be like a father gets an opportunity to kind of wish fulfill for his son via his mother. So that moment is just giving her enough courage to not let the son know that he was already gone, which was very profound and very special and a very good use of that mechanism. Because that's very common in a lot of the dementia stories that I've seen or read. But ultimately, I was very thrilled with how the movie portrayed it and very thrilled that it never became silly. Like, nothing was overblown. And I mean that 100%. Even in like the beating scenes later on and people not understanding what's going on with him, like that's what happens. And the fact that a film like this prepares somebody much more than something like The Notebook does. Because there you're kind of reverse engineering it, where here you're steamrolling into it. So it worked. Correct. It was great. I can see why everybody loves it. It took me a minute to sink into just, this is a different version of it than what I've directly experienced, but I'm glad it exists because now this is a version of what could happen. And as a direct result of that, go do your dream. Do whatever you're dreaming about doing. Do whatever you want to do and do it now and do it big and do it hard. And if you can, make a record of it. So I tell these stories and I'm on this podcast so that if anything like that happens to me, my daughter will have not just pictures of me, but direct examples of how I lived and breathed and talked and spoke. So she doesn't ever have to guess or try to remember, and hope like something like that doesn't happen to her in the future. But that's part of why I dug so deep into doing what I'm doing now. If you've got a footprint that you can stick on the planet, do it, because you might forget at some point that you did. And that's tragic.
Definitely, amazing, man. Amazing, man. No, thanks for being so open and sharing that. Like, obviously, that was the basically link how you and I sort of connected back then, and sort of it's funny to sort of see that come around. I know. Sort of this movie, so it's sort of come back like that. But yeah, man, it's such a. I'm glad you said it was an accurate representation because, like, I personally don't have any close experiences with like dementia or mental illness in that capacity. Only thing I have is my wife had once known somebody who was quite gone, and I think it was closer to what Mohanlal had because she couldn't actually speak. Like she was old age. Like she was not. The tragic part about this movie was Mohanlal was young. Like I think they called it pre-senile Alzheimer's. They called it at that in the movie, which was obviously extremely rare. So just to see the family go through that, but yes, Sonny, man, how was your experience watching sort of that side of things unfold as well?
Yeah, look, I'm touch wood lucky to not have had any of these experiences or know of people who have. So all I could do was respond to what I was seeing on screen, and like it really makes you think about your own mortality. Because of course this is not meant to be a thriller, but I couldn't help but think, what if this happened to me? Like I'm, maybe a couple of decades away from what Mohanlal was in this film. And like, it's a theme in this movie is you've got to have luck. And the insinuation there is that he maybe has suffered from bad luck by having this early onset or pre-senile version of this. So it really made me reflect a lot on what it means for me, and kind of my parents are both getting to 70 years of age now, and what it means if they would have something like that. And it really, for the first time in a long time, brought home the perspective of their own mortality, and maybe, me needing to do more in terms of spending time with them, because I'm obviously not living with them. So those were kind of lessons for me rather than something I've had to deal with. But like, I can only imagine how challenging this is, because I struggled watching the wife respond to his illness, the son respond, even how the father responded, because the father talks about how, he loves it when his son is in town because he doesn't have any responsibility now. And suddenly the film takes a 180 and he's back to being the man of the house, and he takes it on like a champion, but you can't help but see that it's wearing on him because he is elderly. He doesn't have the strength that he once used to, or the mental fortitude. And I was like, the generational impact of this is enormous. And in a way, it's so unique that the person suffering themselves can't appreciate it. It's everyone else, which is not I guess sicknesses all have that element to it if you have loved ones, but it was particularly stark in the case of kind of dementia or Alzheimer's here. So it was a flooring experience, and I don't know, an important movie in some ways for people who haven't had to go through something like this, to understand that at least when you get to old age, these kind of things become more common, less common in younger age, but still a possibility.
Yeah, and I want to make it clear also, like my dad lived a big life, right? Like he had a great life. And I have no doubt in my mind that if the tables were, turned and my daughter was going to be sick, he would have been like, take me,
Yes.
Ultimately, my experience with having gone through it directly is that I appreciate stuff like this so much more because of exactly what you just said, Sonny. Like now you think, oh, maybe that dinner that I would have canceled on, maybe I'll try to make that dinner, or maybe I'll try to do a video call during that dinner, or, things like that. It's not necessarily guilt, but if you're in the moment and you happen to be there, put down your phone, or, maybe make it count. Maybe make as much time as you can count as humanly possible, because we all get pulled away to do our various things at any various time. But I spent a lot of good quality time, and he made sure of that, so that I'm not sad. I miss him all the time, but I'm not sad. My mission now, whenever I talk about this stuff, is to make people understand if it happens to anyone you know, and you happen to be the one who is maybe in the caregiver role or is adjacent to the caregiver, do what the father and the son did here. Try your absolute best to make that person feel comfortable. Try to keep your head on straight and know that it is not happening to you. It's happening to them. You're the person that has the opportunity to try to make something out of nothing. You're the person who has the opportunity to try to make somebody feel comfortable, because they do become infantilized. That scene with the father oiling Mohanlal, and he's picking his arm up, and he's like kind of
yes.
And that was why I appreciated this version of it so much, because regardless of Mohanlal's choices and which version of dementia he was expressing, the way the family reacted is spot on. And the way that it affects the family is spot on. And that is powerful. That's extraordinary.
Yeah.
And I couldn't be happier that it exists.
Yeah, man. Definitely. Incredible movie. And let's actually react to one of the earlier scenes from this, because I do want to talk about sort of Mohanlal a bit more. And I think it's best to actually watch him and actually talk about it. Because, I mean, you could do a whole show just on that itself, because what a masterclass. All right, guys, let's watch this. This is from the first, I guess, before he turned. That's it. Let me know if you guys can see it.
Yep.
All right.
എല്ലാരോടും അങ്ങനെ പഠിക്കണം എന്നൊക്കെ പറഞ്ഞിട്ട് സാറും മോനും കൂടെ ഇങ്ങനെ കളിച്ചു നടക്കല്ലേ? അത് കൊള്ളാം. ബോൾ എടുക്കട്ടെ.
പഠിത്തത്തോടൊപ്പം കളിയുണ്ട്, കളിയോടൊപ്പം പഠിത്തം. Every small thing can teach a lesson. എല്ലാരും കൂടെ എങ്ങോട്ടാ ഞായറാഴ്ചയായിട്ട്?
ഇതിപ്പോ തേടി നടന്ന കാലെ ചുറ്റിയ പോലെ ഞങ്ങള് സാറിനെക്കാളും വീട്ടിലോട്ട് വരുമായിരുന്നു.
ഇതെന്താ തമ്പുരൊക്കെ ആയിട്ട്?
കലോത്സവമൊക്കെ അടുത്ത് വരുമല്ലേ. ഇനിയിപ്പൊ നമ്മുടെ പിള്ളേര് മാത്രമായിട്ട് ഡാൻസും പാട്ടൊന്നും പഠിച്ചില്ല എന്ന് വേണ്ടാന്ന് വിചാരിച്ച എല്ലാത്തിനും കൊണ്ടങ്ങ് ചേർത്തു. ആ ഭാഗവതർക്കാണെങ്കിൽ എല്ലാ കൊല്ലവും ആകെ കൂടെ ഒറ്റ പാട്ടേ അറിയത്തുള്ളൂ. എന്നതാടി മോളത്?
ഇത് ഭാരതീയരുടെ കവിതയല്ലേ?
പക്ഷെ എല്ലാ കൊല്ലം ഈ പാട്ട് പാടാൻ 4-5 പേര് കാണും.
എല്ലാ കുട്ടികളും മൂപ്പരുടെ ശിഷ്യരാ. തമിഴായതുകൊണ്ട് അധികം പേരുണ്ടാവില്ല. ഒരുവിധം തട്ടി മുട്ടിയൊക്കെ പാടിയ സമ്മാനം കിട്ടും.
അപ്പൊ ഇവളാ സാറെന്നാ മീറ്റിംഗ് പാടിയ പാട്ടോർത്തെ. അതാകുമ്പോ ഒരു വെറൈറ്റി ആകുമല്ലോ.
അതും ഭാരതീയരുടെ കവിതയാ. അതൊക്കെ ഈ കൊച്ചുകുട്ടികളെ കൊണ്ട് പാടിക്കാന്ന് വെച്ചാ അതൊരല്പം റൊമാൻറ്റിക്കാ.
അതൊന്നും സാരമില്ല സാറേ. ഇതിന്റെയൊക്കെ അർത്ഥവും വ്യാകരണം അറിഞ്ഞിട്ടാണോ ഈ കുട്ടികൾ പാടുന്നതും സാറന്മാര് മാർക്കിടുന്നതും?
ടീച്ചറെ, നമുക്ക് രണ്ടാൾക്കും ഇതിനെ കുറിച്ച് വലിയ വിവരമില്ലാന്ന് വെച്ചാൽ എല്ലാവരും കൂടെ കൂട്ടണോ?
രമേശൻ സാറിന് 10ാം ക്ലാസ്സിൽ പാടാമെങ്കിൽ ഇവക്ക് 9ാം ക്ലാസ്സിൽ ആ പാട്ട് പാടുന്നതിന് ഒരു കുഴപ്പമില്ല. സാറന്ന്
അയ്യോ ഇപ്പഴോ? ഇപ്പൊ ശരിയാകത്തില്ല. ആ പടം വേർത്ത് കഥച്ച്. അല്ല അതല്ല, ഞാൻ എഴുതി ഇവന്റെ കയ്യിൽ നാളെ സ്കൂളിൽ കൊടുത്തു വിടാം.
എഴുതി കൊടുത്തിട്ട് ഒരു കാര്യമില്ല, അത് പാടണ്ടേ.
ഇപ്പൊ ഒന്ന് പാടിത്തന്ന ഇന്ന് ഞായറാഴ്ചയല്ലേ, ഇന്ന് ഇരുത്തി അങ്ങ് പഠിപ്പിക്കാം.
മമ്മി.
ഇനിയിപ്പൊ ഇതെന്തിനാ? അപ്പൊ റെക്കോർഡ് ചെയ്യട്ടെ, പയ്യെ പാടിയാ മതി.
കാറ്റുവെളിയുടെ കണ്ണമ്മ കാതലെ എണ്ണി കളിക്കിன்றേ അമുതൂറ്റിനെ എന്താ ഇത്? നാക്കിന്റെ തുമ്പത്തൊന്നും നിൽക്കുക, ഇങ്ങോട്ട് കിട്ടുന്നില്ലല്ലോ. അമുതൂറ്റിനെ ഇതിപ്പോ എന്ത് പറ്റി?
അത് ചിലപ്പോഴങ്ങനെ എത്ര അറിയാവുന്നതാണെങ്കിലും ആവശ്യം വരുമ്പോഴങ്ങ് മറന്നുപോകും.
ഇനി മനുവിനെ കൊണ്ട് പഠിപ്പിക്കാൻ വെച്ചിരിക്കുന്ന വല്ലതാണോ?
അങ്ങനെയാണെങ്കിൽ ആദ്യമേ പറയല്ലേ.
ഞാൻ ക്ലാസിക്കൽ മ്യൂസിക്കിന് മാത്രമേ
ഒരു രക്ഷയില്ല സാർ. ഞാൻ വീട്ടിൽ കൊണ്ടുപോയി റെക്കോർഡ് ചെയ്ത് സ്കൂളിലെത്തിക്കാം.
ഒന്ന് എഴുതി കൂടെ തന്നേരെ. ഞങ്ങൾ ഇനി ഭാഷ അറിയാതെ എഴുതിയിട്ട് മാറി കുഴപ്പാക്കണ്ട. മോനെ, അച്ഛനെ ഒന്ന് ഓർമ്മിപ്പിച്ചേക്കണേ.
ശരി ടീച്ചർ.
ആ ടെൻഷനൊക്കെ മാറി.
ഓക്കെ ബൈ മോളു, ബൈ.
Oh, I mean, it's pretty chilling scene because, like, you know, you sort of just see the onset of how it's sort of coming. And I think it's the second time in the movie that happens because there's one earlier with the childhood love, of course, that happens. I think that happens before this one. But man, I mean, just watching that and like it seems like it's an innocent thing to happen, but you just don't see it coming. That's the thing that is so scary about this one, right? Like it's like, okay, there's something there, but I don't know how seriously they really took it at that point. But I mean, like the first, obviously we're going to do a bit of contrast, but Mohanlal's like performance in the first half and how he transforms is probably something that's, my God, like amazing. Like, I mean, the second half performance is insane, but I think it's because of this first half setup and how we see him as being such a well put together person in a way.
Well,
respected in the community. It's ridiculous.
Exactly that. The fact that he's kind of portrayed, and I think the camera work and basically everything around Mohanlal is set up to be like he's aware of his stance in society. He knows that his son reveres him. He knows that everybody feels that he is this kind of like local hero, local celebrity, just in being a nice guy and being, you know, rather clever and being capable, dependable, right? Like you could almost put that as the button on it. He's dependable. If you need something, he will do it for you. So seeing that, the way that he forgets it, and then the way that he kind of struggles with it, that was very reminiscent of what happened with my dad, where you'd be like, "Hey, Dad, what's going on over there?" And he'd be like, "Well, I told you." You know, like this kind of immediate, I know what I'm supposed to do, but I forgot exactly what I was doing, so I got a little bit angry, but then he would like put it over to something else, and then my dad would be like, I'm fine, it's all gravy. And you could kind of see that, like, I'll turn on the charm because I don't remember what you asked me to do or what you were talking about. And that is so effortlessly expressed. between the first, hour of the movie and to that relative break where it starts to occur roughly at about that midway point. And that was extraordinary.
It's beautiful. And you've touched on the point that I think about Mohanlal's performance there the most. And that is that first reaction when he forgets the lines of a song he's probably sung 100 times, and he brushes it off with a smile, and he's trying to make it look like no big deal as everyone is watching him wondering, why isn't he able to remember these lines? And then coming up with a solution, but all the while thinking in the back of his head, something is not right here. And all throughout this movie, we're given glimpses of the fact that Mohanlal, memory is a key theme in this film, outside of the fact that he develops dementia. He teaches his son all of these tricks about how to remember things easily, and he's got all these mnemonics and things that help you remember things over the long term. So he is well placed to understand something is a little bit off here. And he sees the doctor pretty early on in the movie, or at least before the big break happens. And so you see the switch happening in his head in terms of something's not quite right, but for the moment he's just trying to brush it aside to preserve that public image of a man, as you said, Doug, who's very well put together, a pillar of his family, considered extremely knowledgeable and has great general knowledge, and is revered by his son and family. So it's that dichotomy of knowing something's a bit wrong but not showing that to the world at large that is so beautifully done in that first half of the film.
Yeah, and I don't want to jump ahead in case you have this as one of the scenes, but a good juxtaposition to that is also very accurate is the newspaper or the files when he's looking for the files.
Yes.
And that is one moment where they kind of play it off for comedy, but the way he's just like getting really angry with everyone, who did this and where and why is this wrong? And then, it gets played off, but that is that's the progression. It starts off with I don't remember. I'm charming though, and I'm going to be able to, make you forget about this. Don't worry about it. It happens to everybody. And then eventually it gets to the point where there's an inextricable break where, of course, you'd get angry if you forget. Of course, if you remember deep down in the core of who you are that you're supposed to be somebody and you can't remember what it was about you that made you that way, you're going to default to anger or you're going to be scared. And those are the most common two things. And both of those are on display in that scene we just watched.
Yeah. No, I think you mentioned about the camera work as well. And I think it's this scene and that scene you mentioned as well. It does this thing at the very end of the scene. It lingers on him just a little bit longer. And that one is actually a scene I got. So we're going to watch that one as well. And so we're going to see that. We're going to see that.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to step on the toes.
No. It's all good. I edit these and I don't tell these guys to try and get them to see it first time and react to it. Second time. But the camera work is so great in this that you just sort of linger on him for a bit longer. And of course, he is such a master of sort of, the subtleties in his expressions and his face and things like that just change. So he is in a state of confusion.
Those eyes.
And the eyes,
it's the
of
eyes,
course. And the
100%.
100% the eyes. And just that, he's like, something's wrong, but maybe it's not. Maybe, because I think there's a certain thing that happens, and obviously I can't speak from personal experience, but I would assume you don't want to sort of accept that that's what's happening, something like that's happening, because we see things happen with him, even like he's when he's towards the vegetable shopping part, when he's sort of driving around, he just goes through like a red light.
Yeah.
Just goes through it, and then he's like, what's happening? Like he's actually losing the function to actually be able to be in society at a point. And you don't really want to accept that for someone like him who is all about sort of society. And, they have an early on scene about sort of when they ask, your son, what do you want him to be, a doctor or engineer? That's a common question that me and Sonny probably had growing up, especially. But I'm not sure if it's common for yourself, Doug, but yeah.
Oh, I mean, a version of that here in the U.S. is like, you're going to be, you're going to be the president, or I guess very U.S. You're going to be a pro football player. Like, no, I'm going to talk on a funny microphone with my friends. I'm going to do. You know what my real dream is? I'm going to befriend some Australian guys many years from now, and we're going to talk about movies that you've never heard of. Cool.
Exactly. Yeah. They'll be cool with that. But yeah, so I think in that scene, what happens is that basically he wants him to be an IS officer, which is basically in the Indian Administrative Services, so work for the government and, give back to the country and things like that. So he's very proud of sort of, what his place in society is. And you just see that sort of crumble. And I think the first half, while it's not obviously the part people might not remember so much because you remember some pretty epic scenes more towards the second half, but because of the transformation, because they're much more, I guess, graphic in nature, and they really, they really hit you hard. The first half, I think, is so important because while it takes a while to get into it, you feel the emotional pain because of what you've been sharing, the journey of Mohanlal's character and the family, especially the son. We see him, as you sort of mentioned, he's close to his son. He considers him a friend. And he says that at one point, like, I see him more as a friend.
Yeah.
And we see that, like, they're playing volleyball together and like having a good time.
When he tells him the story about the lie, and his son reacts viscerally, like literally just ends up in tears. Like, I lied to you and you know I did it and you did this to make me come clean. And like, you don't, and that's one of the wildest things about dementia. You don't appreciate how damaging it is unless you know how wonderful a person was before, or how put together, or how whole somebody was before. Because it isn't until they start to become only fractured puzzle pieces of themselves that you can appreciate little moments like, okay, right now we're perfect right here in this couch. Great. But tomorrow, if we go to the store, where did he go?
Oh boy.
We lost my dad one time after a concert because you're certain, like, he's well enough with it together today. Like, this is great. And he's dancing at a concert. We're having a great time. And then the moment the crowd starts walking out, of course it would happen. He gets lost. And it's because he can't remember where a car was parked in a parking lot. There's all these things, but you can't really, you, even as the family member, don't want to accept it. And they have to accept it at some point in order for them to say, I don't think I should do that right now. Or get comfortable enough saying, I'm just going to be in the bed today. And then you have to be comfortable enough going, I remember a time where all you would want to do is go fishing this weekend. But yeah, cue up another movie because at least you're safe here. And I know you're drinking water here. Things like that. So that first half is crucial and critical because we need to know how much his son is trying to be an analogous version of him when he grows up.
Yeah.
I can relate 100%. And the fact that he will never be able to show his father that, spoilers if you haven't seen the movie, is like, that's the real tragedy. It's because we see in Mohanlal's eyes, especially toward the end there, like he got his ability to kind of give his wife the permission to be his harbinger of hope for his own son. Correct. Like, this is a guy who wants to be like me. Help him be like me because I can't anymore. Woof.
Yeah. No, it's brutal is definitely the right word. Before we move on to the next scene, Sunny man, what were your first sort of final impressions of sort of the first half, and how that sort of hit you? Because you mentioned about it a little bit, but I guess I'm assuming you also echoed the same points that it's like, it's very important. But I know you are somebody that I've sort of learned you really enjoy seeing this sort of stuff unfold, like you're not in a hurry to get to things. So do you also appreciate this?
100%. And it was even more important in this film than previous films we've watched because you can only see the degradation of his character and the family unit and kind of emotionally attach yourself to that once you see what it was like. Because if he had been a terrible father, or if he wasn't a good person, or if you didn't understand exactly what the change was, it wouldn't hit you quite as hard in the second part of this film. Exactly right. So there's small interactions, him teaching his son or studying with his son, the caresses with his wife, and just how intimate they were. His standing, that song. Yes, exactly. Yeah. That's right. And his standing in the office, and the general respect everyone has for him as a man of great general knowledge, and surprised that he himself didn't end up being a collector because he was so bright as well. Like, that establishes who he is, and then just you work through the implications of what then happens and how all of that is taken away from him, and how that pillar is no longer there, and people trying to, reconstruct their life around him and not have that anymore, and just how bereft everyone is of his relationship and support. Like, it's the seismic change is so hard to just appreciate and comprehend. Like, it really blows you away. And if the first half didn't spend time building that, I don't think you would have had the emotional resonance in the second half, because this is a character piece at the end of the day. There aren't action sequences, great monologues or anything. There are just individual, beautiful moments of character and interaction. And that's all you needed for a film like this when you have Mohanlal's performance. If you didn't have those small scenes, that second half wouldn't have kind of been the gut punch that it was.
No, and they even show his sort of playfulness as well in the first half, right?
Yeah,
like they show
yeah.
he's actually quite playful, so it makes him, hits you even harder, like just knowing that as well.
And it's not just him in a way, it's his son as well. Like his son gets the first scene where he's like flirting with another girl from school or something, and he's in a way the most fleshed out character because he's got a life outside of Mohanlal, even though they obviously depend on each other a great deal. So you understand a little bit about them as well. And then the change in relationship that needs to happen in the second half.
Definitely. We'll move on to the next scene, and there's definitely a lot more to talk about this one. So let me get this one going. And yeah, this is one that's going to hit us just as hard, most likely.
ഈശ്വര, ഇത് എന്തോ പണിയാ കാണിക്കുന്നേ? എത്ര പാടുപെട്ട ഞാൻ ഇതൊക്കെ ഒന്ന് അടുക്കി പെറുക്കി വെച്ചത്. എന്തുവായി കിടന്ന് തപ്പുന്നേ?
ഓഫീസിലെ 2 ഫയല് കാണാനില്ല.
ചേട്ടൻ എന്ത് പ്രാന്തായി പറയുന്നേ? ഓഫീസിലെ ഫയല് നമ്മുടെ ബെഡ്റൂമിന്റെ മേലെയാ കാണുന്നേ. ഒന്നിങ്ങോട്ട് ഇറങ്ങിയേ. ഇന്ന് ഇതിന്റെ മേലെ കിടന്നുറങ്ങാം. കിടക്കാൻ നേരത്തെ ഒരു പണി ഒപ്പിച്ചു വെച്ചിരിക്കുന്നു.
ഇത് എവിടെ പോയി കിടക്കുന്നു? നീ ഇവിടെ എങ്ങാനും 2 ഫയല് കണ്ടോ?
ചേടാ, ഇത് നല്ല കാര്യായി. ഞാനൊരു ഫയലും കണ്ടില്ല. അല്ലത്തിന്റെ ഫയൽ ഇങ്ങനെ എവിടെ വരുന്നേ? ഒന്നിക്ക് ബ്രീഫ് കേസിൽ കാണും, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ മേശപ്പുറത്തോ ഡ്രോയിലോ കാണും.
അവിടെയൊക്കെ ഞാൻ തപ്പിയതാ.
ഇന്നിവിടെ ആരും കഴിക്കുകയും കിടക്കുകയും ഒന്നും വേണ്ട. അടുക്കി പെറുക്കി ഇവിടെ ഇരുന്നാ മതി. മനോ, നീ അച്ഛന്റെ ഫയൽ വല്ലതും കണ്ടോ? അവിടെ
സെക്കൻഡ് ടൈം തുടങ്ങിയ പിന്നെ ഫയലൊന്നും കൊണ്ടുവരുന്നില്ലല്ലോ.
എങ്ങനെ അമ്മ ഇതെല്ലാം താഴെ വീണേ? ഇതിനാടി കൊച്ച പറയുന്നേ, കരിമ്പും കാട്ടിൽ ആന കയറിയ പോലെന്ന്.
ആന അപ്പുറത്തെ മുറിയിലും കയറിയിട്ടുണ്ട്.
ഈ ചേട്ടന്റെ ചില നേരത്തെ കാര്യം. എന്താ ചേട്ടാ ഇത്? ഞാൻ ഇത്രയും നേരം തലയിട്ട് അടിച്ചൊന്നും കേട്ടില്ലേ? അതിന്റെ അടിയിലൊന്നും ഇല്ല ചേട്ടാ. ഞാൻ ഇന്നലെയും കൂടി അടുക്കി പെറുക്കിയതാ.
നിന്റെ അടുക്കി പെറുക കുറച്ച് കൂടുന്നുണ്ട് കേട്ടോ. ഇതെന്താണെന്നറിയോ? ഇതിന്റെ ഇമ്പോർട്ടൻസ് അറിയോ? എല്ലാം പെറുക്കി കെട്ടി അങ്ങോട്ട് തള്ളി. കണ്ടോ കണ്ടോ കണ്ടോ? 1991 രാജീവ് ഗാന്ധി അസാസിനേഷൻ. പിറ്റേന്ന്, അതായത് 14 കൊല്ലം മുമ്പ് മനു നെച്ചറി പഠിക്കുമ്പോ ഹിന്ദുവിൽ ഒന്ന് ആർട്ടിക്കിളാ. ഈ കളക്ഷൻസ് മാത്രം റെഫർ ചെയ്താൽ മതി അവൻ IAS എഴുതിയെടുക്കാൻ. ഭദ്രമായി ഞാൻ അലമാരി സൂക്ഷിച്ച സാധനം കൊണ്ട് തള്ളിയിരിക്കുന്ന അടകണ്ടില്ലേ? പൊക്കോണം എന്റെ മുമ്പിൽ. ഇങ്ങനെയാണ് ആ ഫയൽ ഏതെങ്കിലും കുപ്പയെ കൊണ്ട് തള്ളിയിട്ടുണ്ടാവും. ഒരു അടുക്കി പെറുക്ക് കാര്യം വന്നിരിക്കുന്നു. പബ്ലിക് ലൈബ്രറി കുത്തിയിരുന്ന് നോക്കിയാൽ കിട്ടാത്ത സാധനങ്ങളാ. ഇവിടെ അതിന് വല്ല വിലയുണ്ടോ?
അമ്മ കരയാതെ, അമ്മ കരയാതെ. അച്ഛൻ ചുമ്മാ നമ്മളെ കളിപ്പിക്കാൻ പറഞ്ഞതാ.
അച്ഛൻ വെള്ളം ചോദിച്ചായിരുന്നോ? ഹലോ ഹലോ ഹലോ. കട്ടായി. ഇതെന്താച്ചാ മൊത്തം വേർത്ത് കുളിച്ചല്ലോ. വാ എഴുന്നേക്കാം. എന്തൊരു വെയിറ്റ് അച്ഛന്. എഴുന്നേൽക്ക്. അമ്മേ, കഴിക്കാൻ വിളമ്പിക്കോ.
മോളെ ടേബിളിൽ പോയിരുന്ന് കഴിക്ക.
വേണ്ട, അമ്മയും വാ.
അമ്മ ഇതൊക്കെ വിളമ്പിട്ട് വരാം. മോള് ചെല്ല.
നമ്മള് നമ്മുടെ ലങ്സിന്റെ 1/3 ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്നുള്ളൂ എന്നാ യോഗ ക്ലാസ്സിൽ പറഞ്ഞേ.
അത് നോർമൽ ബ്രെത്ത്. ഒരു ഡീപ് ബ്രെത്ത് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ at that time our lungs are almost full. മഞ്ജുകുട്ടി ഇത് എവിടെയായിരുന്നു? ഇതെന്നാ പാൽക്കഞ്ഞി കുടിക്കുന്നത്?
അച്ഛൻ വഴക്കുണ്ടാക്കിയോണ്ട് കൂട്ടാനൊന്നും വെച്ചില്ല.
അതിനടി കൊച്ചിന് കൂട്ടാനൊന്നും വെച്ച് കൊടുക്കാഞ്ഞ്?
ഇനിയിപ്പോ കൂട്ടാനൊന്നും ഉണ്ടാക്കാൻ എനിക്ക് വയ്യ. പപ്പടം വേണേ പൊള്ളിച്ചെടുക്കാം.
പപ്പടം വേണേ പൊള്ളിക്കാന്നോ? അപ്പൊ പൊള്ളിച്ചില്ലേ? ആ
അങ്കിളെ, ഈ ചിക്കൻ ഒന്ന് ഫ്രിഡ്ജിൽ വെക്കാവോ? ഞങ്ങളുടെ ഫ്രിഡ്ജ് ഫുള്ളാ. നാളെ എടുത്തോളാം.
ഡാഡി എന്തേ ഡിന്നറൊക്കെ കഴിഞ്ഞു?
ഏയ്, അവിടെ കലവരയുടെ തുടങ്ങിയിട്ടേ ഉള്ളൂ. ഓക്കെ, ഗുഡ് നൈറ്റ്.
നാളെ വന്നെടുത്തില്ലെങ്കിൽ ഞങ്ങളങ്ങ് പൊരിച്ചടിക്കും.
അത്ര വലിയ കൊതിയാണെങ്കിൽ നീ തന്നെ അങ്ങോട്ട് പൊരിച്ച് തിന്നോടാ.
ഈശ്വര, ആരാ ഇതെടുത്ത് ഫ്രീസറിൽ വെച്ച്? ഞാനല്ല.
ചേട്ടനല്ലാതെ പിന്നെ ആരെയും ഫയലെടുക്കുക?
ഇല്ലില്ല, ഞാനെന്തിനാ ഈ ഫ്രീസറിനകത്ത് എടുത്ത് വെക്കുന്നത്? മോളെ നീ എടുത്ത് വെച്ചോ. സംഭവിക്കാൻ വഴിയില്ല.
വഴിയൊക്കെ ഉണ്ട്. ഒരു 100,000 കാര്യമില്ല തലയിലിട്ടോണ്ട് നടക്കുന്നത്. പിന്നെങ്ങനെ?
Oh my god. Oh my god. That was yeah, that wasn't easy, man. Like, it's almost like this uncomfortableness. Like, you know, even at the end when they're laughing, it's kind of like, I don't know if it's a form of like self-defense or self-denial in some ways. Because I know I definitely wasn't laughing at that, knowing sort of the lens that we're seeing it in. But like, I don't know if that's what, I don't know what, if that was the purpose of them laughing for that. Like,
It's,
we can't believe this, we're just going to laugh it off.
I think it all because we're seeing a lot of it through the lens of Mohanlal, right? We're seeing it through his character. So that's why we're being hit with those musical tones and everything. And then the family just thinks it's funny, right? They're like, oh, you put it in the freezer. Like, you must be really stressed at work. It's to me, that was meant to underscore the fact that the family wants to ignore the signs as long as humanly possible, which is 100% what happens. You know, with my dad, it was all these subtle little things at first, and you would just be like, okay, wow, that's weird, you didn't know that, or like he was a big classic car guy, like, okay, you can't remember that particular model, that's strange. Or like my snowblower of mine, you guys don't know much about snowblowers, but I do. But you know, I was trying to fix a snowblower in the garage, called him up, like, Dad'll know. And he was like, well, you know, best of luck, son. And these, like, those moments are very well, and this was one in particular where I was like, yeah, they got it. They nailed it. And while the music is a little bit explosive and kind of maybe a little heavy-handed, and maybe that shot in the freezer was a little too horror movie for me, it definitely shows you, like, in their own mind, all you're doing is trying to put the pieces back together and going, what the hell is wrong with me? So much so that with my dad, he even, like, when he was watching TV, he saw this pill that was advertised all about how it could make your memory better and how it could make you more invigorated. And he ordered like a 6-month supply of this stuff. Just got on the phone and ordered. Wow. And then he got on some call list, and these people would call him and tell him about these magazines, and he started ordering stuff. And it got to the point where my mom had to give him like a fake credit card so he couldn't just order these things. Because he took these pills, and then he was like crestfallen. He was like, I still feel fuzzy. That was the way he would describe it. It was like fuzzy. So this scene is integral for everything else that comes later on, because you start to see that snap, you start to see that anger, and like, how can you not appreciate this thing as much as I do? You know, these things, which is not even what I was looking for. These things, would you even appreciate that? You know, like, and then you're deflecting. You know, like
blaming others.
You're absolutely just tossing it out the window and being like, well, this is what's most important right now. I know that seemed crazy, but this was what's most important always, you know. And then you can breathe and kind of get back into, again, you see him turn on the charm with his daughter and with his wife. And then there's that laughter, but inside he is absolutely tormented because he has no idea what happened, no recollection. And to the movie's credit, we don't get a scene of him, like, it didn't go black and white and we see him in slow motion putting it in there, right? Like, that would have been out of place. So again, very important.
Unbelievable.
Definitely true, man. And go for a second.
I was just going to say, I think this scene, and Doug, you've touched on it, it shows exactly the two sides of Mohanlal's character here. The one part that is kind of charming and put together and quite knowledgeable. He's telling his son that his lungs are not at capacity and just espousing some general knowledge there. And his son's amazed by that. He's charming when the neighbor comes in and drops off the food, and he's having a laugh about things. But then it also at the very start underscores exactly the kind of person he's about to become, i.e. someone who's forgetful, who's confused, who, there isn't so much anger in the second half. We don't see that side of his character very much, but just that general state of confusion. And I think one of the things that the film does really well is just there seems to be a shift in his body sometimes when he's portraying that person who is confused because, he's struggling to get up and needs his son to help him up. This is a guy who was playing volleyball like a couple of scenes back, right?
Yes,
and so there's this physical deterioration in his body that is a sign of things to come, this lack of mobility, flexibility, and incapacity to do things that he could do so easily. So even that is a little bit of foreshadowing as to that physical deterioration, not just the mental stuff as well.
Yeah, that seems pretty crucial because it's like I guess the first time we're seeing his face change.
Yeah.
Because when he was on the ground,
With
he
the
sort of with the tongue, and he's looking like a bit childlike. That's what happens to him at the end. He sort of becomes like a child. In some ways, like that, you sort of see signs of that. It's just very brief and short, but you're sort of seeing snippets. So it's good foreshadowing. Like this movie does a great job of foreshadowing, actually, bit by bit, and just giving you enough to just see enough, sort of going through. Nothing over the top, so you sort of don't see it before you're ready. It's almost like it prepares you to sort of get you to where you have to see at the end, and that's the journey. That's what this movie is about, the journey towards the eventual end, unfortunately. But again, just fantastically shot, fantastically done. The director honestly deserves a lot of credit for this. Obviously, Mohanlal's an absolute champion, and the rest of the cast also really good. But the director was, you are right, Doug, with the fridge shot. I always like a good fridge shot, but maybe that one a little bit.
Yeah, it was a little 80s horror movie for me. But to your point, though, talking about the rest of the supporting cast, like it is all about the support staff when somebody starts going through this stuff. And we see a lot of stuff with the wife, and we see a fair amount with the father later on, who is just knocking it out of the park. But the son does so much of the heavy lifting of like, I hope everything is going to be fine. This person is my hero. This person is my entire world. Because while this character is a pillar of the community, that is his foundation. And to watch that and internalize that, and then have to consciously make the decision to go and do something, just like I did. I was having a child. I can't pull that back. Yeah. He was going to go to school, and he's taking tests and exams. You can't just pull that back. So you have to make the conscious decision at one point to say, I know that's not my dad right now. And that's horrible. And I want to be there for the person that is there, but that's not my dad. So I can justify that and go be over there. But then the eventual tragedy of knowing what occurred when it occurred doesn't stop you from, absolutely crumbling. It just prepares you for a moment later on where your grief window will be shorter and you can carry on that hope. So his portrayal is great. And like the way he dances on the roof in the one scene where he's looking down, the movie does a great job of showcasing to you his potential. And it also, I feel, does a really good job of showing you that Mohanlal's character is very well aware of this potential. And that juxtaposition of like, I want to be there, but I know I can't, when we eventually, get to the point that he accepts. And I want to be there for my father, but I know I can't because I have to go be what he wanted me to be. Like, that's the rip. That's the fracture. That's easily the toughest thing to deal with. And you have to make your decisions, and you have to be all right with it, because ultimately that person isn't there. They're different now. They are someone else now.